It was late, past midnight, when I got on the bus to the city. I had spent the weekend at my parents' village, and now I was heading back to my apartment. The journey wasn't long, maybe 2 hours, but at this hour, the roads would be nearly empty. The bus itself was almost deserted. There were only a handful of passengers scattered throughout. An old man near the front, staring blankly out the window. A woman sitting 3 rows ahead of me, her head resting against the seat. And a man in the very back, slouched so low I could barely see his face. The driver gave me a brief glance, then shut the doors with a hiss. The bus lurched forward, and we were on our way. For the first 30 minutes, nothing happened. The bus rocked gently as we drove through the dark countryside, the only sounds being the low hum of the engine and the occasional rustling of trees outside. I put on my headphones and leaned against the window, watching the endless stretch of road disappear into the night. Then I noticed something. The old man near the front was gone. I blinked, confused. I hadn't seen him get off. The bus hadn't stopped at any stations, but his seat was empty. I looked around. The woman was still there, motionless. The man in the back hadn't moved. Maybe I had just been mistaken. Maybe he had gotten off, and I just wasn't paying attention. Shrugging it off, I went back to my music. Another 20 minutes passed. I dozed off for a bit, my head resting against the cold glass. The bus felt eerily quiet, even for this time of night. Then I woke up. Something felt wrong. I sat up and glanced around the bus. The woman was gone. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Just like the old man, she had vanished without a trace. No stops, no sound, just gone. I looked toward the driver. He didn't seem to notice. He just kept his eyes on the road, his hands gripping the wheel tightly. I turned toward the back of the bus. The man in the last row was still there, but he was sitting up now, watching me. My heart started to pound. Something wasn't right. I shifted in my seat, trying not to look at the man in the back, but I could feel his gaze on me. Unblinking, unmoving. I wanted to ask the driver what was going on, but something stopped me. Then the lights flickered. Just for a second, the bus dipped into darkness before the overhead lights buzzed back on. When they did, the man in the back was gone. I shot out of my seat, my breath catching in my throat. My skin felt ice cold. I turned in every direction, my mind racing. There was no one else on the bus. Just me, and the driver. I forced myself to stand and staggered toward the front. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaky. "Where did everyone go?" The driver didn't answer. "Sir." Slowly, he turned his head, and I realized the driver was not the same man who had been there when I got on. His face was pale, almost sickly. His eyes, sunken and dark, locked onto mine through the rearview mirror. "We're almost at the last stop," he said, his voice hollow. I didn't know what he meant. I didn't want to find out. Without thinking, I ran to the doors and slammed my fists against them. "Let me off," I yelled. The driver just smiled. The bus kept moving. I panicked. The city was still miles away, and I had no idea where we were. The bus wasn't stopping. I looked out the window, just darkness and empty roads. That's when I saw the emergency exit handle near the back. Heart pounding, I ran toward it, yanking it down. A loud alarm blared through the bus, but I didn't care. I shoved the door open just as the bus swerved violently, trying to shake me off. I jumped. The impact knocked the air out of my lungs as I hit the cold asphalt, rolling onto the side of the road. My arms burned, my knees scraped raw, but I was alive. I gasped for breath, watching as the bus kept going, its red taillights disappearing into the night. And then it was gone. No headlights in the distance. No engine noise fading away. It was just gone. I lay there for a long time, trying to process what had just happened. Then, slowly, I got to my feet and started walking toward the city. By the time I reached a gas station, the sun was rising. The cashier gave me a strange look as I stumbled in, exhausted and shaken. Then, on impulse, I asked him if he had seen a bus pass through recently. He frowned. Buses don't run on this road after 11 p.m. I checked my phone. 4:13 a.m. That bus, whatever it was, hadn't been part of any normal route, and I had barely made it out alive. It was a freezing winter night when I boarded the last bus home. The streets were eerily quiet, and a thin layer of fog curled around the streetlights. The bus stop was empty when I arrived, and for a moment, I wondered if I had missed it. But then, out of the darkness, Bus 113 emerged, its headlights piercing through the mist like ghostly eyes. The doors groaned open. I hesitated. The doors groaned open. I hesitated. The bus looked old. More than just old, wrong. The paint was chipped, the windows clouded, and the interior lights flickered weakly. But it was late, and I didn't have another choice. I stepped inside. The bus was nearly deserted. Just a handful of passengers sat scattered in the dimly lit space. A man in a business suit stared down at his hands, unmoving. A woman in the back cradled something in her lap, humming softly to herself. Another figure sat near the window, their face turned away. The driver, an older man with sunken eyes, barely acknowledged me. He shut the doors with a mechanical hiss and pulled away from the curb. I found a seat near the middle, shoving my hands into my pockets for warmth. The air inside the bus was cold, colder than outside. The windows were fogged up, and when I wiped at the glass, my breath caught in my throat. The city streets were gone. There was nothing outside, just blackness. I told myself it was just the fog, that I was imagining things. But as the bus rolled on, stopping at places I didn't recognize, my unease grew. The first stop was an alleyway. A hunched figure in ragged clothing climbed aboard, dragging a heavy sack behind them. Their face was obscured by long, tangled hair, and as they shuffled past me, a horrible rotting smell filled the air. The second stop was in the middle of a forest. No roads, no buildings, just towering trees disappearing into the black sky. A tall, thin woman in a white dress stepped onto the bus. Her head was slightly tilted, and when she passed under the flickering lights, her skin looked gray, like something long dead. I gripped the seat in front of me, my stomach twisting. I gripped the seat in front of me, my stomach twisting. None of these places were real. I tried to stay calm, to convince myself that I was just overtired. But then I noticed something that shattered any illusion of normality. The man in the business suit, his hands were wrong. They weren't hands at all. Long, thin fingers stretched across his lap, the skin cracked and peeling. His head jerked slightly, and for the first time, I realized he wasn't breathing. Neither was the woman in the back. Neither was the driver. I was the only one on this bus who was still alive. Panic set in. I stood up, gripping the overhead rail. "Where are we going?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The driver didn't answer. I stumbled forward, grabbing his shoulder, cold, lifeless, and that's when he turned to look at me. His face was rotting. Sunken eyes, flesh peeling from his jaw, lips curled into something between a grin and a grimace. "You shouldn't have gotten on," he rasped. The bus lurched. The lights flickered wildly, and suddenly, the windows cleared. Outside was a gaping void. I ran. I didn't know where I was going. There was nowhere to go. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it, the emergency exit. I lunged for the handle, my fingers wrapping around it just as the bus began tilting forward, as if falling into the endless darkness ahead. A deafening screech filled the air. The passengers turned toward me, their hollow eyes wide, their mouths opening too wide. I pulled the handle. The door burst open, and I jumped. I hit the pavement hard, rolling onto my side as the sound of screeching metal filled the air. I scrambled to my feet just in time to see bus 113 barreling forward, and then it vanished. No explosion, no smoke, no sound, just gone, as if it had never existed. I stood there, gasping for breath, in the middle of an empty street. A moment later, another bus approached. A real one. Clean, bright, the kind I was supposed to be on. The driver opened the doors and gave me a confused look. "Hey, you okay?" I hesitated. I turned, looking back at the empty road behind me. That bus was never there. And yet, I could still feel the cold grip of those passengers watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for me to get back on.